Aviation history is full of machines that look like mistakes but were actually brilliant solutions to impossible problems. Every strange bulge, flat wing, or bizarre fuselage you're about to see exists because engineers refuse to follow convention. If you're into deep dives on the weirdest machines ever built, hit subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's get into it. Number 1. NASA Pathfinder Plus. The NASA Pathfinder Plus doesn't look like an airplane at all. It looks like a flying surfboard, or maybe a paper airplane built by someone who forgot what airplanes are supposed to look like. This solar-powered, remotely piloted aircraft was built by AeroVironment as part of NASA's ERAS program, a project aimed at developing long-endurance, high-altitude drones that could stay aloft for days instead of hours. Its design is almost absurdly minimal. A single, incredibly thin wing spans nearly 100 feet, covered almost entirely in solar cells, with no fuselage in the traditional sense and no tail at all. Small pods hang beneath the wing, housing the electric motors and equipment. There's no cockpit, no windows, nothing that resembles a conventional plane, because it was never meant to carry people. It was meant to carry sunlight. In August 1998, Pathfinder Plus set a world altitude record for solar-powered aircraft, reaching over 80,000 feet, higher than most commercial aircraft could ever dream of flying. It cruised at speeds barely faster than a bicycle, sometimes under 20 miles per hour, because speed was never the point. Endurance was. NASA envisioned aircraft like this eventually replacing satellites for certain jobs, hovering over one spot on Earth for months at a time, silently gathering data or relaying communications. What makes it look so alien is exactly what makes it work. There's no need for a heavy structure when the mission is slow, high, and solar-powered. Every curve, every panel, every inch of that wing exists purely to catch sunlight and stay in the air using the least energy possible. It's not built to impress you, it's built to survive at the edge of the atmosphere on nothing but daylight, and that's precisely why it looks like nothing else that's ever flown. Number 2. HL-20 Personnel Launch System. The HL-20 looks like a spacecraft that got lost on its way to a sci-fi movie set, and in a way, that's exactly what it was designed to resemble. Developed by NASA's Langley Research Center starting in the late 1980s, the HL-20 Personnel Launch System was a lifting body concept, meaning it generated aerodynamic lift not from wings, but from the shape of its own fuselage. Picture a stubby, wedge-like body with tiny stub wings barely visible at the rear, twin vertical tail fins angled outward, and a rounded nose that looks more like a shoe than a spacecraft. There's no long fuselage, no visible cockpit windows in the way you'd expect, just a compact, almost toy-like shape that seems too small and too odd to survive re-entry from orbit. But that odd shape was the entire point. NASA wanted a vehicle that could launch on a rocket, carry up to 10 astronauts to and from low Earth orbit, and then glide back down to a runway landing like an airplane, all without wasting mass on wings that weren't needed once outside the atmosphere. The lifting body shape let the entire vehicle act as an airfoil during descent, cutting weight and complexity compared to a traditional winged shuttle. A full-scale mock-up was built and tested for crew ergonomics, but the HL-20 never actually flew as a real spacecraft. Budget priorities shifted, and the program was shelved by the mid-1990s. Still, its DNA didn't disappear. The design directly influenced the Sierra Space Dream Chaser, a real spacecraft flying cargo missions today that looks almost identical to this decades-old NASA concept. So next time you see Dream Chaser on the news, remember it started as this strange little wedge sitting in a hangar, decades ahead of its time, and looking nothing like anything meant to fly. Number 3. Aerospace Line's Mini Guppy. If you've ever seen the Mini Guppy fly by, your first reaction was probably laughter, followed immediately by confusion. This aircraft looks like someone took a normal cargo plane and swapped its fuselage for an enormous bloated balloon. It is, without exaggeration, one of the strangest silhouettes ever to take to the sky. The Mini Guppy was built by Aerospace Lines in the late 1960s, derived from the Aerospace Lines Pregnant Guppy and Super Guppy family, all of which existed for one very specific reason: transporting oversized rocket and aircraft components that wouldn't fit inside any normal cargo hold. NASA needed a way to move massive Saturn rocket stages across the country during the Apollo program, and conventional aircraft simply couldn't carry something that wide. So engineers took the fuselage of a Boeing C-97 Stratofreighter and essentially inflated it, stretching the upper section into a gigantic bulbous shape nearly 20 feet in diameter. The nose of the aircraft actually hinges open, swinging the entire front section sideways so oversized cargo can be loaded straight through like a drive-in garage. Nothing about this aircraft looks aerodynamically sane, yet it flew, and it flew reliably. The Mini Guppy was the smaller sibling in the Guppy family, used to transport rocket stages, aircraft fuselage sections, and other oversized industrial cargo that had no other way of traveling by air. Despite its comically oversized profile, it handled surprisingly well, cruising at around 200 miles per hour while hauling cargo that dwarfed the aircraft's own original design specifications. It's a perfect example of function completely overriding form. Nobody designed the Mini Guppy to look good. They designed it to solve a logistics nightmare, and the result became one of the most recognizable and most mocked aircraft silhouettes in aviation history. Number 4. Martin X-24A. The Martin X-24A looks less like an airplane and more like a teardrop that someone strapped a rocket engine to. Built in the late 1960s as part of the U.S. Air Force and NASA's Joint Lifting Body Research Program, this aircraft had no conventional wings at all. Its entire fuselage was shaped to generate lift, a rounded, bulbous body tapering into a blunt, almost comically stubby tail. From certain angles, the X-24A resembles a submarine more than an aircraft. It has a rounded nose, a flattened underside, small stub fins jutting out near the rear, and absolutely nothing that looks like a traditional wing structure. The shape was intentionally unconventional because researchers were testing whether an aircraft could generate enough lift purely from its body shape to safely control descent and landing without wings, technology that would directly inform future spacecraft design, including the eventual Space Shuttle program. The X-24A was air-launched from a modified B-52 bomber at high altitude, then either glided unpowered back to a runway or fired its own rocket engine for powered test flights, reaching speeds over Mach 1.6. Pilots described flying it as demanding and unforgiving, since a lifting body has none of the natural stability wings provide. Every landing required precise control, since there was no room for error in an aircraft shaped more like a bathtub than a plane. Between 1969 and 1971, the X-24A completed 28 test flights, gathering critical data on hypersonic re-entry and low-speed handling characteristics for wingless vehicles. That data didn't disappear once the program ended. It directly shaped later lifting body designs and re-entry vehicle research for decades afterward. So while the X-24A looks like an engineering mistake sitting on a runway, it was actually one of the most important stepping stones toward how spacecraft returned safely to Earth. Number 5. Airbus Beluga. The Airbus Beluga earns its name honestly because it genuinely looks like a whale decided to try flying. This massive cargo aircraft has an oversized, bulging upper fuselage that towers over its own cockpit, giving it a silhouette unlike almost anything else in commercial aviation. It looks top-heavy, almost cartoonish, and completely impractical, yet it's one of the most functionally important aircraft Airbus has ever built. Airbus needed a way to transport large aircraft components, wings, fuselage sections, tail assemblies, between manufacturing plants scattered across Europe. Trucks and ships were too slow, and no existing cargo aircraft had a hold wide enough to swallow entire airplane wing sections whole. So in the early 1990s, Airbus modified an A300 airliner, dramatically enlarging the upper fuselage into a massive, bulbous cargo bay, while keeping the cockpit positioned low, beneath the bulge, almost like an afterthought stuck to the belly of a much larger shape. The result is an aircraft with a cargo hold roughly 24 feet in diameter, capable of swallowing entire wing sections for aircraft like the A320 or A350. The cockpit sits so far below the main body that pilots have described the sensation of flying it as sitting underneath a hovering blimp rather than inside a conventional airliner. Airbus later developed the Beluga XL, an even larger version based on the A330, with an even more exaggerated hump to handle bigger cargo loads for newer aircraft programs. Despite its bizarre proportions, the Beluga is a critical piece of Airbus's entire manufacturing chain, regularly crisscrossing Europe to keep production lines moving. It's proof that sometimes the strangest looking aircraft in the sky are also the ones quietly keeping an entire industry running. Number 6. Boeing 747 Large Cargo Freighter Dreamlifter. The Dreamlifter looks like someone grabbed a normal 747 and shoved an inflatable pool float onto its back. This aircraft, officially the Boeing 747 large cargo freighter was built specifically to solve one problem: transporting massive fuselage sections and wings for the Boeing 787 Dreamliner between suppliers scattered across the globe and the final assembly line in Everett, Washington. Boeing started with 4 used 747-400 airframes and modified them dramatically, expanding the upper fuselage into a huge bulging cargo bay nearly 3 times the internal volume of a standard 747 freighter. The bulge starts right behind the cockpit and swells outward, giving the aircraft a lopsided, almost bloated appearance that looks structurally questionable, even though it's perfectly sound. What makes loading even stranger is how cargo actually gets inside. The entire tail section of the Dreamlifter swings open on a massive hinge, rotating the whole rear fuselage to the side, so oversized 787 components can be slid straight in from the back, like sliding a couch through a door frame that's slightly too big for the house. Watching this happen in person looks less like aircraft maintenance and more like watching a building perform surgery on itself. Despite carrying enormous, irregularly shaped cargo, the Dreamlifter cruises comfortably at commercial jet speeds and altitudes, letting Boeing move components between Japan, Italy, and the United States in a matter of hours instead of weeks by ship. Without this aircraft's bizarre proportions, the entire 787 supply chain simply wouldn't function the way it does today. It's an aircraft engineered entirely around logistics, and it shows in every awkward, bulging inch of its silhouette. Number 7. Boeing X-40A. The Boeing X-40A looks like a fighter jet that got left in the dryer too long, shrinking into a stubby, wingless-looking wedge with none of the sleek proportions you'd expect from a modern aircraft. This small, unpiloted vehicle was developed in the late 1990s as a technology demonstrator for the Space Maneuver Vehicle Program, a joint effort between the U.S. Air Force and NASA, exploring reusable, autonomous spaceplanes. Roughly the size of a small car and weighing around 1,700 pounds, the X-40A has a flattened, almost triangular fuselage with small delta wings blended so seamlessly into the body that it's hard to tell where the fuselage ends and the wings begin. There's no cockpit, no canopy, nothing suggesting a human was ever meant to sit inside. It looks more like a scale model prop than a functioning flight vehicle, and in some ways, that's exactly what it was built to be: a smaller scale stand-in for a much larger future spacecraft. The X-40A never launched into space itself. Instead, it was carried aloft by helicopter and released for unpowered glide tests, checking how a lifting body-style vehicle would autonomously navigate its way back to a runway landing after a hypothetical orbital mission. Every flight tested guidance software, aerodynamic stability, and landing precision without a single person aboard. Its data later fed directly into the design of the X-37B, the secretive orbital spaceplane the Air Force and Space Force still operate today for classified missions. So while the X-40A itself looks almost too small and too strange to matter, it quietly proved the concepts that now let a much bigger, much more capable spacecraft glide home from orbit entirely on its own. Number 8. Boeing Phantom Eye. The Phantom Eye looks like an aircraft built by someone who forgot to give it wheels that made sense. Its 2 enormous bicycle-style landing gear wheels sit directly beneath the fuselage, one in front of the other, giving it a lanky, awkward stance on the ground that looks almost guaranteed to tip over. In the air, it's not much less strange, with a long, slender fuselage, a huge wingspan relative to its size, and twin engines mounted high above the wings like ears on either side of its head. Developed by Boeing's Phantom Works division, the Phantom Eye first flew in 2012 as a high-altitude, long-endurance unmanned aircraft designed to loiter for days at a time, gathering surveillance data or relaying communications from altitudes above 65,000 feet, far higher than commercial jets ever fly. To make that kind of endurance possible, Boeing chose liquid hydrogen as fuel, an unusual choice that demanded a lightweight, elongated airframe and specially designed engines capable of running efficiently at extreme altitude for extended periods. That bicycle landing gear wasn't an accident either. With such a long, narrow fuselage and massive wingspan, conventional landing gear placement would have added unnecessary weight and drag. Instead, Boeing engineers used 2 centerline wheels with small outrigger wheels near the wingtips for balance during takeoff and landing, a configuration that looks unstable but works precisely because the aircraft is so light and its wings so long. The Phantom Eye never entered full production, but it proved that hydrogen-powered ultra ultra-long endurance flight was genuinely achievable, influencing later high-altitude drone concepts still being explored today. It's proof that sometimes the strangest-looking aircraft aren't failures. They're simply built for a job so specific that normal proportions never applied in the first place. Number 9. Boeing B-58 Hustler. The B-58 Hustler doesn't look like an accident, it looks like a weapon, and that's exactly what makes it so unnervingly strange. This Cold War-era bomber, introduced in 1960, has a razor-thin, needle-like fuselage, a stark white delta wing with almost no visible curvature, and something no other bomber in history has carried quite like this, a massive pod slung directly beneath its belly, nearly as long as the aircraft itself. That pod wasn't cargo storage in the traditional sense. It housed fuel, a nuclear weapon, or reconnaissance equipment, and it could actually be jettisoned mid-flight once its contents were used or delivered, an almost unheard-of design choice that made the B-58 look less like a bomber and more like a fighter jet dragging a torpedo underneath it. Combined with its severely swept delta wing and complete lack of a horizontal tail, the Hustler looks aggressively minimal, like every unnecessary surface was stripped away in the name of speed. And speed was absolutely the point. The B-58 was the first operational bomber capable of sustained Mach 2 flight, cruising at over 2,300 miles per hour, faster than most fighter jets of its era. It set numerous world speed records throughout the 1960s, including transcontinental crossings of the United States in under 2 hours, an almost unbelievable figure even by today's standards. That speed came at a steep cost. The B-58 was notoriously difficult to fly, demanding constant pilot attention, and its accident rate was famously high, earning it a grim reputation among crews. It was retired by 1970, replaced by aircraft with better safety records and more flexible mission profiles. But visually and technically, nothing before or since has quite matched the B-58's bizarre needle and pod silhouette, a shape built entirely around raw, uncompromising speed. Number 10. Boeing YC-14. The Boeing YC-14 looks like a normal cargo plane that someone forgot to finish designing properly, with two enormous engines mounted awkwardly high on top of the wings instead of hanging beneath them like almost every other transport aircraft. From certain angles, it looks structurally backwards, like the engineers ran out of time and just bolted the engines wherever they'd fit. That placement, however, wasn't a mistake at all. Developed in the mid-1970s for a U.S. Air Force competition seeking a new short takeoff and landing tactical transport, the YC-14 used a technique called upper surface blowing, directing engine exhaust directly over the top of the wing and flaps to dramatically increase lift at low speeds. Mounting the engines high on top of the wing wasn't just possible with this approach, it was absolutely essential for the concept to work. The result was startling. The YC-14 could take off and land in distances short enough to operate from rough, unimproved airstrips, hauling cargo loads that would normally require far longer runways. Watching it fly, with jet exhaust visibly hugging the curve of the wing surface, made it look almost like the aircraft was cheating the laws of aerodynamics, using brute engine placement to force performance a conventional design simply couldn't achieve. Despite its impressive short-field capabilities, the YC-14 ultimately lost its Air Force competition to the McDonnell Douglas YC-15, and only 2 prototypes were ever built. Still, the aircraft's oddly mounted engines weren't wasted engineering. The upper surface blowing concept it pioneered directly influenced later Boeing transport studies and remains referenced in aerospace research today. It's a perfect closing example of everything on this list. An aircraft that looks broken purely because it was built to break every convention standing in its way.